Stop whatever you're doing and look down at your hands. Just let them rest. Don't force anything, don't pose them. Let your arms hang exactly the way they want to hang. Or, if you're sitting, let your hands fall into your lap the way they naturally fall. Now, look at your palms. Which way are they facing? If you're like roughly 87% of adults tested in postural studies over the last 2 decades, your palms are facing backward, or inward, toward your thighs, toward each other. Not forward, not up, not neutral. Now here's the experiment. I want you to slowly rotate your forearm, not your whole arm, just the forearm, until your palm faces directly forward, like you're about to catch a ball thrown at your stomach. Feel that? That pull across the front of your shoulder? That slight resistance, like your arm doesn't want to go there? Like it's stuck in a groove it doesn't remember leaving? That resistance is not random. That resistance is a record. A record of thousands of hours, thousands of days, maybe decades, spent in a position your skeleton was never designed to hold for this long. And what you just felt, that subtle, almost forgettable stiffness, is connected to a chain reaction running from your fingertips to your brainstem. A chain reaction involved in shoulder degeneration, nerve compression, breathing capacity, and even how your brain perceives threat. This video is about the direction your hands have quietly abandoned, and why your body has been paying the bill for it, one small compensation at a time, for years. Here's the first mystery. Anatomists have a name for the neutral resting position of the human arm. It's called anatomical position, and in true anatomical position, standing relaxed, arms at your sides, your palms are supposed to face forward, not backward, forward. This is the default setting your skeleton was built around. It's the reference point every textbook uses. It's how your muscles, tendons, and joint capsules are designed to sit when nothing is pulling on them. But almost nobody rests like that anymore. So the real question is, if forward is the default, why did an entire species quietly rotate away from it? What happened to the human arm? To understand this, you have to look at 2 bones most people can name but have never actually thought about, the radius and the ulna. Your forearm isn't one bone. It's 2, lying side by side, connected by a strip of connective tissue called the interosseous membrane. When your palm faces forward, these 2 bones lie parallel, like train tracks. This is called supination. When your palm rotates backward, toward your body, toward the ground, into that phone scrolling, keyboard typing, steering wheel gripping position, the radius actually crosses over the ulna, like scissors closing. This is called pronation. Here's what most people miss. Pronation is not a resting state. It is an active muscular event. Specifically, it's driven by a muscle called Pronator Teres, along with Pronator quadratus deeper in the forearm. To hold your arm in pronation for hours a day, these muscles have to stay in a low-grade, semi-permanent contraction. Now think about your day. Typing, scrolling, driving, eating with a fork, carrying a bag. Almost every functional task your hands do requires some degree of pronation, which means for most modern humans, the pronator muscles are almost never fully off. And a muscle that is never fully off eventually shortens. This is where it gets interesting, because a shortened forearm muscle doesn't stay contained in the forearm. Pronator teres attaches at its upper end near the inner elbow. But the story of internal rotation doesn't stop there. It travels upstream. It travels all the way to the shoulder. Here's the bigger mystery. Why would a muscle problem in your forearm have anything to do with your shoulder joint? A completely different joint several inches away, controlled by entirely different muscles. The shoulder is supposed to be the most mobile joint in the human body. A ball sitting in a shallow socket built for 360 degrees of movement in every plane. So why do shoulder specialists report that internal rotation, the same rotation you just felt when your palm turned backward, is one of the most common postural faults they see walking through the door? And why does this correlate so strongly with something almost every adult over 30 has heard of, but few understand? Impingement. Here's where the anatomy gets almost architectural. Your humerus, the upper arm bone, sits inside the shoulder socket like a ball resting in a shallow dish. That ball has a natural resting rotation. And when the forearm spends years in pronation, the muscles connected through the fascial and myofascial chain, particularly the internal rotators of the shoulder, like subscapularis, pectoralis major, and latissimus dorsi, begin adaptively shortening too. This is called internal rotation syndrome by some clinicians, though it isn't officially one diagnosis. It's a cascade. Picture the humerus slowly twisting inward in its socket, like a doorknob being turned and left turned. As it rotates, the greater tubercle, a bony bump on the upper arm, migrates forward toward the front of the shoulder, and directly above that bony bump sits a narrow space called the subacromial space, barely a few millimeters in most adults. Running straight through that narrow space are the tendons of the rotator cuff and a fluid-filled cushion called the subacromial bursa. When the arm rotates inward and stays there, that space narrows even further. Every time you raise your arm, reaching for a shelf, putting on a jacket, brushing your hair, those tendons have to slide through an already compressed tunnel. This is impingement. Not an injury that happens in one moment, but a slow architectural narrowing, built one pronated hour at a time, for years, until one day a completely normal movement, reaching overhead, suddenly produces a sharp, unexplained pinch. Most people blame that pinch on getting older, but that's not the strange part. The strange part is what's happening at the same time, in a completely different system, one most people never connect to their shoulders at all: your nervous system. Because running down through that same narrowed corridor, alongside the tendons, is a bundle of nerves and blood vessels called the brachial plexus, a nerve network that begins at the base of your neck, at the cervical spine, and threads down through the shoulder, under the collarbone, past the pectoral muscles, and out into your entire arm and hand. And here's the real question. If your shoulder is rotating inward, and your chest muscles are shortening, and your upper back is being pulled forward, what is happening to the space where that nerve bundle has to pass? This is where the story stops being about muscles and joints and becomes a story about your brain's supply lines. When the arm sits in chronic internal rotation, the shoulder blade, the scapula, doesn't stay neutral either. It tips forward and rounds, dragged by the tightened pectoralis minor, a small but disproportionately powerful muscle running from the ribs to a bony hook on the shoulder blade called the coracoid process. As the shoulder rounds forward and downward, the space beneath the collarbone, the costoclavicular space, and the space between the pectoralis minor and the ribs both compress. The brachial plexus, along with the subclavian artery and vein, run directly through this compressing corridor. Clinicians have a name for what can happen here: thoracic outlet syndrome, a condition where nerve and blood flow to the entire arm become mechanically restricted, not by disease, not by injury, but by posture, by position, by years of pronation, quietly dragging the shoulder forward, millimeter by millimeter, narrowing a passageway that was never built to be permanently narrowed. Symptoms include tingling in the fingers, cold hands, a heavy, fatigued feeling in the arm by the end of the day. Most people who experience this never once think to check the rotation of their palms. But the body isn't finished telling this story yet. Because this same forward rounding pattern doesn't stop at the shoulder, it reaches the neck, and the neck reaches the brainstem. Here is where everything changes, because now we leave the arm entirely. When both shoulders round forward, pulled by pronated, internally rotated arms, the head has nowhere else to go except forward too, to keep your eyes level with the horizon. This produces the posture researchers call forward head posture, where the ears sit ahead of the shoulders instead of stacked directly above them. For every inch the head moves forward of its neutral position, the effective load on the cervical spine multiplies. At neutral, the head weighs roughly 10 to 12 pounds. At just 3 inches forward, a shockingly common measurement in phone users, the effective load on the neck muscles can exceed 40 pounds. Now think about what runs through the cervical spine. Your spinal cord. And branching from it, the network of nerves controlling not just your arms, but your diaphragm, your heart rate regulation, and the vagus nerve pathways involved in your parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for calming your body down. Chronically forward-rounded shoulders compress the thoracic cavity. Less room for the rib cage to expand means shallower breathing. Shallower breathing means less oxygen exchange, more reliance on accessory neck muscles just to breathe. The same muscles now already overworked from holding your head up against gravity's multiplied load. And chronic shallow breathing keeps your nervous system biased toward sympathetic dominance, the fight or flight state, even when there is no threat at all. This is where posture stops being cosmetic and becomes neurological. Studies using EMG and posture analysis have found that slumped, internally rotated posture is associated with lower testosterone and higher cortisol responses within minutes compared to expansive, open postures. Not because slouching is weak, but because your brain uses body position as raw data. An open chest, externally rotated shoulders, and forward-facing palms signal safety and readiness. A collapsed, internally rotated frame signals threat, protection, retreat. Your brain has been reading your palm rotation as a threat signal every single day without you ever knowing it was listening. And here's the part that reaches all the way into aging and longevity. Chronic forward head posture and rounded shoulders are directly correlated in longitudinal studies of older adults with reduced lung capacity, higher rates of compression fractures in the thoracic spine, and, remarkably, increased mortality risk. Not because posture causes death directly, but because posture is a visible marker of something deeper. How much muscular tension your nervous system has been forced to maintain for years just to keep you upright against a pattern your body never fully adapted to. The rotator cuff tear, the pinched nerve in your fingers, the tension headache at the base of your skull, the shallow breath you don't notice until someone asks you to take a deep one. These aren't separate problems. They are downstream events in a single mechanical story that began the moment your palm turned away from forward thousands of repetitions ago and never turned back. So let's rebuild the chain from the beginning, because now every piece fits. Your arm was built to rest with your palm facing forward. Modern life, typing, scrolling, driving, gripping, demands pronation almost constantly. So the muscles that rotate your palm inward are never fully off, and over years, they shorten. That shortening travels upstream into the shoulder, twisting the humerus inward in its socket, narrowing the subacromial space and setting the stage for impingement and rotator cuff wear that most people blame on nothing more than age. At the same time, the same postural collapse rounds the shoulder blade forward, compressing the corridor where your nerves and blood vessels pass beneath the collarbone, creating the tingling, the cold hands, the fatigue that seems to come from nowhere. That rounding drags the head forward too, multiplying the load on your cervical spine, compressing your rib cage, shallowing your breath, and quietly biasing your entire nervous system towards stress instead of calm. A signal your brain has been reading silently every single day. And all of it, the shoulder pain, the numb fingers, the tension headache, the shallow breath, even the subtle hormonal shift in how safe or threatened your body feels, traces back to one small, forgettable detail. The direction your palm was resting in right now, before you even read this sentence. Your hands didn't just change position. They changed the mechanical destiny of your shoulders, the pressure inside your neck, the openness of your chest, and the story your nervous system tells your brain about whether you are safe. So look at your hands again. Turn your palms forward. Hold it for 10 seconds. Feel where the resistance lives. That resistance is not weakness. It's a map of every hour your body spent adapting to a world it was never built for, one quiet rotation at a time.